say, what is your, you say, I didn't get questions. You heard what I said? What did I say? You use pragmatics. You don't know what I said. Okay, but the point is, there's a declarative. Let's go with the. This is the white. No, I'll use the whiteboard. Yeah, this is the one, right? Thank you. And that's the duster for it. Okay. So someone says. So this is echo questions technically are not written, right? This is just a way we are saying. And now you heard I ate. Now whether this sent or John ate, let's make it because we don't know how to. Let's just say John ate. And this is supposed to be, we don't know if it's true or false because people make false statements too. And then you say, there are two ways in which you can say it. John ate what? Right? And you can also say it this way. What did John eat? Right? So yeah, you're right. This one even follows the syntactic rule, right? Of WH fronting and everything. And you want an answer. So it is a question. We can ask two things. What possible answers are there? So let me ask you. What are the possible answers? No, not with this. So answer will be John ate meat, right? We will stress meat. But in asking, you didn't know. The reason you're asking is because you're missing some information. What is that? So it will have this form. John ate. One possibility is meat. Another possibility is. So the problem is this. We know from ate that it's got to be something edible. Now, if you didn't, it has to have the same, some kind of phonological shape that has to be the same, right? So I'm not able to think, maybe you didn't even hear the syllable. So if you had heard the syllable, I don't know what else rhymes with meat. Beat, yes. So suppose you heard the eat part, like how much we didn't hear, we don't know, but let's say meat and beat is one option, and seed, I don't know, whatever. Let's say even these two. Now so we break up a set of propositions. But the set of propositions is not of the form lambda p, they exist in x, food x, right? Because food x could have been many other things. It could have been vegetables, it could have been potato, but you're constrained by the phonological shape. So the restriction on x has to be phonological. However, depending on how much you heard, if you heard eat, if you heard the syllable, so how does one represent, I can't remember. Suppose you heard this much, then you're looking for a consonant, right? But this is not a semantic category. It's a phonological category. And so however you represent it, you represent that. So that's the first difference, which does not say that it's not a question. It just says it's a different kind of question. Its restriction is different. And the second part is, you're not saying which of these propositions is true. When you're asking an echo question, it's not about truth. So the answer-hood operator for an echo question has to be different. It has to be the proposition just uttered. Now, I don't know if anyone has done extensive study in whether it has to be the exact phonological thing, meat, or whether you can substitute, say in another language, you could say mas, you can use Hindi. And people, whether that is a direct answer or not, I don't know. But this is something that Ron Artstein, and that's in my book, the reference to that work, he has actually given a way of doing this that is compositional. So that's the first thing that's different. It is a question, but the set of propositions are based on phonological form rather than semantic category. And the second thing is the answer-hood operator has to be cued to things that have been immediately precede. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing, which is why sometimes people don't talk about it in terms of questions, is because it does not respect islands, which is what we will be discussing in your workshop part. You will be thinking about islands. So you can, I think the famous example is, I don't believe in these. This is a lot of the work on this was done in the 70s, and then it kind of not so much since. Like this stuff I have in my book, Ron had, Artstein had later in his dissertation, etc. And Komarovsky also talks about echo questions. So the references that I know I have in the book there, you can look it up. But a lot of the empirical work really comes from 70s Janda and Sadok perhaps. But anyway, this was an example. Again, John doesn't believe in this is a right. So if I say this, John doesn't believe in adjacency. What are you going to say? John doesn't believe in what adjacency? So this is breaking up a word, and WH movement typically, moves phrases, doesn't move sub. So this is called sublexical. Echo questions can target parts of words, and that's what Ron Artstein's dissertation actually, as far as I know, is one of the first to actually take on the challenge of that. So it's partly shaped by phonology. The alternatives are partly shaped by phonology and partly by the morpheme. So I think he has an example like orthodontist. Dontist, you can have periodontist, orthodontist, but you can't just pick up some random thing and put dontist, because we have some morphology, that some meaning attached to that morpheme dontist. So it's constrained by those things. Here, the alternatives were subjacency and adjacency. I think those were the two. But does that kind of answer your question? We will look at, and you said something about a question. The answer is a question. But it is true also for echo questions. If you say, if you had an example like this, fine. But if I said, who ate meat? So I'm asking, who ate? What will you answer? Who ate what? So that first who is copied, and then so you're asking me to repeat my question, and then the set of, so what you have as the meaning is a set of questions, not a set of propositions. So that's where I think what you were thinking. If you have two WHs, and in a question, in a echo question, one of them has echo intonation, one has a regular intonation, then you'll get a set of questions as an answer. We'll get to that. It's one of my favorites. So, okay. Any other leftover issues from yesterday? Okay. Today. Yes.
The definition of functional heads like C, I don't really understand that, like how it varies with the specification for C, like in a declarative, what it does, what is it.
So, in a declarative, you can think of the declarative as giving you this. There are different ways of doing it. So, I think the simplest is to think of it this way. It does nothing in a declarative. So you have a proposition, a minus WH. See, so you are Vishaka. Vishaka's question is, if you have this can be plus WH, and this one, do you understand this one? Or
Not really.
not really. Okay. So this is a proposition, right? TP is your basic, it's got the predicate, it has the right number of arguments. So you have a proposition, or at least enough of it. What is the meaning of a proposition? The meaning of a proposition is the set of worlds in which it is true. One way to model it. What do we want out of a question? We want a question to have a set of propositions in the basic case, getting away, no echo question and all that, no multiple question, WH right now. So how do you do that? How do you go? It has the same pieces, right? So the idea is we can make this the locus for making it, building it up into a set of propositions. Okay, so when we hear a question, this part may be common. The simplest one is to think about yes-no questions, because there's no variables or anything. You say, it is raining. If this is minus WH, we don't have to do anything. This is just a set of worlds in which it is raining. So this one is easy. This one, that's not good enough, because that proposition is not what we are going to assert. We're going to look a little bit at that today. You have in mind, you're in a space where both options are open. You typically ask a question when you don't know whether it is raining or it is not raining. And that's what this does. So it creates, it's the vehicle for creating a set of props. In the end, this is what you want. It is raining. It is not raining. This is what you're going to present to your addressee. Anything the addressee has the information to choose one of these two, right? But there has to be some place in the syntax where this happens, and this is the place we assume is the source of this, okay? We did the nitty-gritty a little bit yesterday. Where does it play out? Another place in which it plays out is selection. So far we were yesterday only looking at direct questions, right? Matrix questions. But this could be embedded under believe, right? And you can say believe is a relation between a proposition and an individual. If I believe the earth is flat, then that's my, there are many things I would probably do. I wouldn't believe certain things that people tell me about, it takes 24 hours for this to, blah, blah, blah. All the scientific facts that we take for granted because we think the earth is not flat, I would not buy those things, right? Because I'm a believer in the earth is flat. And by the way, there is a whole society and they have different branches even, so I wouldn't be alone. I would be in good company, I suppose. So the point is, it's a relationship between a set of worlds where that set of worlds is all of those worlds, the earth is flat and everything that follows from it, right? So it's a relationship between some individual here and a set of worlds. But if you had a question, that wouldn't work, right? I believe whether the earth is flat, because there is, so we would put it in the meaning of the verb believe, that it needs a proposition. So then this is the functional head that it would want, right? Because this is the functional head that gives you the meaning that believe is looking for. By the same token, if you have the verb ask, the meaning of the verb ask suggests that I have some doubt. I have two possibilities at least, that I don't know, am I in this world or am I in this world? Or this class of world or this class of world. Therefore, I shouldn't, this minus WH won't help me because it will just give me a proposition. I asked it is raining. That it is raining is bad because one way to think, I got a minus WH that gave me a proposition, and now the meaning of the verb ask is clashing with this. So now instead what I want is something that is plus WH that can give me this alternation, and then ask says, the addressee will tell me whether it is this, whether I'm in a world like this or in a world like this. So that's it, kind of ties together. Now, I'm going to tell you right now that this is the picture, baseline picture that we're going to use, but selection turns out to be a little complicated or interesting. I wouldn't say complicated, though it is complicated, but this is not as simple a picture. But this is a good starting point, and it's still, I think, it's still reliable, it's still something to work from. Uh, Apropos the point I was making earlier that sometimes you rediscover the wheel and it's just too bad. You give yourself brownie points for having put in the work. Well, when I was writing this book, I was looking at selection and I started thinking about various things and I realized, oh, it doesn't quite work like that. And then I kind of spent 3 weeks figuring out something. I was quite happy with myself for having. It wasn't the full solution, but it wasn't bad. And luckily for me, I don't know, I decided to chase some reference and I discovered that it had been done. So I saved myself the embarrassment of, presenting something that was not my own as my work. But it had been there in the literature. And for all I know, I might have read it, months ago, maybe even years ago, and forgotten that I had read it. So, one makes mistakes, but one should be very careful not to make the mistakes one can avoid. So, but I learned something. I was happy. Okay. Then, like I said, there are other things you will discover which will be your own and which you'll be able to take credit for. Okay, anything else? All right, let's move on to the next topic. So yesterday what we discussed was a basic, first we looked at the phenomenon and noted that questions can be thought of in different ways, but there is a sense in which we can pin down something, a canonical connection, right, and between form and function. And then we looked at how we can use formal semantics to model the connection between form and meaning. We did the syntax semantics interface part of it, which is what this question was about, right? So again, there'll be more to do, no doubt, but let's move on to the next stage. So this is a little bit, I'm not going to do all of this handout. I want to give just enough background that the reason I want to do scope marking is because I want to show you an empirical phenomenon where these issues play out. So I'm sort of interleaving stuff. So this will be in action, and you can see whether the analysis appeals to you or not. You can see what the arguments for that analysis is, so that it gives you some idea of how the interfaces work. Some of it is old work, especially the part on the syntax semantics interface part. But then there's a semantics pragmatics part that is new and I think interesting. Certainly it would help me to see whether it appeals to this group of people. Okay, so the first few pages here, maybe even just 2 pages, is to give you the background that we'll need to do the pragmatics part of it, okay? So this is a working hypothesis. All of you are aware that this simple picture of a CP with a spec and a C0, that's like old school already, right? The left periphery is very vibrant, and I don't know how many projections it has. I don't control the syntax of it well, but we know that the left periphery is more articulated than just a C minus WH and a C plus WH, right? Okay, so what is the left periphery? The left periphery, as I understand it, is anything above TP. I don't know whether quantifier raising goes into left periphery. I'm not very sure. Does it? People, or whether it starts at C0, I'm not sure. But for our purposes, we can ignore quantifier raising for now at least. Let's say C, from C plus minus WH up above that, there may be other projections. One projection that I'll be interested in looking at, it goes, as far as I can tell, by 2 names. And I'm not sure that I've seen a clear distinction between the two. Anyone remember force P, right? And speech act phrase. So these are two functional projections or levels that have been proposed that will be of direct relevance to us. Force P is so here's the part that I'm not 100% sure of. It won't really matter. This goes back to the question earlier. So I had CP, C bar, C0, TP. If plus WH minus WH, is this what determines force? Who knows about force P? Who studied this stuff? Nobody? Oh, then I can say whatever I want. Okay. So, as I understand it, force P is what tells you whether you're dealing with a question. Is that the force of what you're saying? Or are you dealing with a proposition? So there's a sense in which one could think of this as force P, but I think there's more than that. What is a speech act phrase? That's where you actually use that question, and that's where all these differences are coming up, right? Is it a rhetorical question? Then it's a different kind, maybe a potentially different kind of speech act. So yesterday I talked about felicity conditions of a normal information seeking question. Does anyone remember there were 2 or 3 parts to it?
Yeah, 3 parts to it. That the person should be ignorant of you.
The speaker should be ignorant.
Yeah, and must want to know about it.
And
Should want to know the. Very good. Wow. Okay. So ignorance, desire, and faith. Ignorance about the propositions, desire to know, and then faith that the addressee knows it. And whenever one of these 3 is not quite what the context supports, that's when we go to that's one way of going to a non-canonical question, such as rhetorical question, etc. And then we impute maybe an indirect speech act of assertion, emphatic assertion even maybe. So the speech act phrase, for my purposes, I'm not going to distinguish force P and speech act phrase. I'm going to stick with the idea that this part is common to declaratives. There's a sense in this is the part that basically takes care of what is the predicate, how are the arguments related, right? Is this the internal argument, external argument, etc. So this part is common to declaratives and interrogatives. This is where we get either a proposition or a set of propositions, something like that. And then somewhere higher up, this is where the binding, etc. will happen. So somewhere above this will be the part where speech act coordinates and speech act based information will be captured. Okay, so that will be, you need the speaker and the addressee. These are contextually supplied elements. These are not part of what a sentence is about. Like I can give you we can talk about is it raining as an example, right? We're not concerned who's the speaker, who's the addressee. We just assume some speaker, some addressee. But if we actually use it, then it matters who is saying to who, for example. So certainly in main clauses there will be so in this little picture, this is what I assume, that at CP we'll get the content, i.e. whether we are dealing with a proposition or a set of propositions, something like that. And then above that, if it's a main clause, we will definitely, let's say we get the speech act phrase that will say, speaker does not know whether alternative A is true or alternative B is true. Speaker wants to know whether alternative A or alternative B is true. Speaker believes addressee knows whether A is true or B is true, etc. Right? And by uttering by making this, by using this sentence, the speaker is putting the addressee, placing an obligation on the addressee to answer. All of these are, in some sense, common sense. What we understand of a question is just that it's being located, it's being made explicit and located in a syntactic position. So this is the one option for a for a main clause, whether it's an assertion or whether it's a question. Let's agree that there is a speech act phrase. Okay. One question that is open is whether you can get, so if I put in the speech act phrase here, in a main clause this will be there. You will have speaker, addressee, among other things, sorry, addressee and subconditions. So if it is assert, the speaker makes the claim. If it is question, speaker asks the addressee to make the claim, right? Choose one of them. What do you think? Do you think speech act phrases would be there in embedded clauses? No, certainly I believe. You don't believe an assertion necessarily. People argue about wonder, question, may. So I personally, we'll see. There are people who've argued for it and why. I'm in two minds. I'm certainly conservative. As my basic view is that no, you don't embed speech acts, except in quotations, of course, right? Quotations you would have. But we'll see to what extent one should let it in. Some people will let it in much more readily than others. But these are open research areas, so it's not that I'm, these are things we have to work on. We can look at what the arguments are, but if the arguments are not, don't determine the answer, that's the nature of research, right? Okay. So this is where I'm coming from. So we have form, a declarative. Its content is a proposition. Its function is an assertion. Assertion means the speaker believes the truth of it and wants the addressee to accept it too. Interrogative is a set of proposition. It's a question. So yeah, I think I'm going to. Till when are we going? Till about 11:30, 12? Is that the idea? 11?
We can take a break around 11.
Oh, for chat.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Okay, so we.
Or you can, if you want 11:30, I can ask.
No, 11 is good, right? We want that time. Yeah, no, I just want to see how to. Okay, 11 is good. I'll go through this and then I'll introduce my thing. So, in the proposal or the title of this course, I talked about asserting, asking, and answering. And so far, basically, I've been talking about speech acts in terms of asserting and questioning, right? And I think this is generally accepted. I've been talking about answers, but answer is just a declarative, right, in the basic case. Does one need a separate speech act? I don't know. I put it there, answering. But maybe it's, what is the issue behind? I'll just present the issue. Maybe, it doesn't need a separate speech act. Maybe it's a type of assertion, but in the context of a speech act of question, it gains certain extra features. So I think let's look at 1A. If I come and tell you, oh, Mary talked to John at the party, or Mary talked to John yesterday, whatever, right? Does this imply that she only talked to John? No, okay. So that's the sentence, right? Mary talked to John, it's entailment, as long as it's a situation where she had some conversation, that's good enough, right? But now speaker A asks, who did Mary talk to yesterday? So I'm looking at the handout that has the left periphery and the example. Who did Mary talk to yesterday? And you say, Mary talked to John yesterday. Does that imply that she talked only to John? There's definitely that sense, right, that it's an exhaustive answer. So this exhaustivity, the fact that she only talked to John, wasn't in the declarative form earlier, right, when it was just used to when we had a simple assertion. So I'm putting it in there not to say that we need a new speech act that says there's a speech act of answering. There may be or there may not be. But I just want us to train ourselves to this idea that answering in the saying the same declarative, using the same declarative in response to a question ends up having certain features that the other one does not, right? That's all I want to say here. And that's apart from the fact that I like the asserting, asking, and answering had a certain ring to it, but I'm just highlighting that this exhaustivity, this sense that this and no one else creeps in. It can creep in other contexts too. So if I say there was John, Sue, and Mary at the party, so John, Sue, and Bill at the party, Mary talked to John. Then again you get the feeling she didn't talk to the others. So it's not just question, but you get, and there's a lot of work these days about how exhaustivity or these kind of readings enter into the discourse. Which is why I'm saying I don't know that you need a separate speech act of answering, because in that context too you're getting the same feeling. But it's just something to keep in mind. So the idea is I'm going to introduce the dynamic semantics, which for some of you it may be new. What we have been doing so far could be thought of as static semantics, in the sense that you take a sentence, setting aside questions, a sentence, and you say it denotes a set of propositions. But again, just a cautionary note, even a simple declarative has things that requires contextual specifications. So if I say it is raining, I'm talking about it is raining today at this, the present tense gives us some clues, but probably it's also about location. So context does feed into our understanding of these, or in describing the semantics, but you can say that comes from this level, right? The now, here, whatever. That's what the specification of in which place, at what time has this sentence been uttered. But even more dramatically, if you say, I am tired, or I want tea, what proposition is that? The set of words in which X wants tea. What is X? Depends on who says it, right? So, I am tired is maybe true, spoken by me, maybe true, spoken by you, may not be true, spoken by the third person, right? So, really, there are indexicals that need their value provided. So, static is not so static, is my only point. We're not going to worry too much about it. So, turn the page and let's look at the dynamics of discourse. And I've given the references there so you can look it up. I'm sure you have access to all of this stuff one way or another. So you will be able to read. But this is really talking about how information builds up in discourse. Right? So the basic idea is simple. You have to idealize a little bit. When we start off, let's say in a neutral context, of course we know certain things, assuming we have all gone to had similar types of educational backgrounds. Perhaps we all believe that the earth is not flat. Is there anyone from the Flat Earth Society here? Don't laugh, they have a right to be, but apparently not here, right? So we will, the set of words that we will start out with as live options, all the words in which the earth is flat, we've already ruled them out, right? So you never start with the full set of possible words. We can imagine it. It's not that hard to imagine, right? So it's not that, but as live options, we know that they don't exist, or that's what we think, right? So all of us are in agreement on that. So our set of words is constrained by that belief. So all of our worlds are worlds in which the earth is not flat. But there are many things we don't know, like, do you know what kind of car I drive? Do you even know if I drive? Right? So, as far as I know that whether I can drive or not, but you all don't know. I know what kind of car I drive, but you all don't know, right? So our common ground, our common information pool does not include this information. Therefore, if you found out that I drive, that's fine. Or if you find out that I don't drive, that too is fine, right? At this point, this is not really, but what will happen? You will add a new piece of information and the set of possible worlds will shrink, right? All the worlds in which, let's say I tell you, I drive very well or whatever. In the US I drive. Let's say I say something like that. So you know I can drive. You will now not expect me to say, how can I, I have to walk because I don't drive. That will be a contradiction, right? So these are just things that we know that we accept. But all good ideas, there's something very simple about them, right, at the heart of it. The genius is in connecting these ideas or determining which of these ideas that we believe or we know or we use in our day-to-day life actually play a role in determining how we use language, right? That's where this thing is so brilliant. So the idea is that if you have the common ground is a set of propositions. So that set of I'm now telling you I drive. So that set of proposition very simply started with the earth is not flat. And some, various other such things, right? So we had one proposition in our common ground, and now we have another one which is not as momentous, but still, Vinita can drive or drives or whatever you want to say, okay? When we had just this in our discourse, then we had a set of worlds and we had ruled out all the worlds in which the earth is flat, right? These were all the possible worlds. In some of them, Vinita drove, and in some of them, she did not drive, right? Once I say Vinita can drive, all of this goes, right? So these become, so as the propositions grow, the set of worlds that make all those propositions true shrink. Does that make sense? You had your hand up as, who had not heard about common ground? Yeah, does this make sense? This is the common ground, and this is the context set, the set of worlds that makes this. That's the essence of the idea, okay? One other idea is that there are things, natural language presupposes, that has constructions or words that presuppose something. What is a so if I say, I am also tired, that doesn't, if I just start out after this, what would be your reaction to that? Who else, right? You are not challenging that I'm not tired or I'm tired, right? That's my, but the word also has a presupposition that the proposition should have applied to someone else as well, right? And that has not been satisfied. That's why you said who else. But suppose I say I am tired, and then Renuka says I'm also tired. No problem, because there's a proposition here. Before we decide whether Renuka is tired, we can't really argue with someone. It's an internal state. If I say, I have blonde hair, you can argue with me. No, you don't. You're delusional. You can't see your own hair. I can see your hair, right? But I'm tired, you can't really argue with me. But suppose she was to say, I am also blonde. I say, I'm blonde. One crazy person, she says, I am also blonde. You will say, no, you're not. Again, it's about being blonde or not being blonde, right? The also part is not being challenged. That's the presupposition. So if I started out by saying, I'm also blonde, there are two problems here. One, I don't look at them, I've never looked at the mirror, right? So there's that problem about the fact of whether the predicate is true, holds of me or not. And then there's the problem of also, the presupposition part. So the two are independent, and the idea is presupposition basically says before I decide whether what you're saying is true or false, I need to check in my common ground whether the presupposition is there. Does the common ground entail whatever it is that presupposes it? So that's basically it. That's the essence of dynamic semantics. But I'll just go through one or two this page. Yeah, questions? Okay, so on page 2, I've basically just spelled out some of the things. So if I say, this is a red pen, I'm asserting, right? This is a red pen. This is like the blonde case. Will you accept it? Probably not, right? But if you were to accept it, then could I follow it up by saying, and it is red? Sounds unnecessary, right? Redundant. There's nothing, no inconsistency, but it's entailed. Actually, I could just use black, right, for this. I could say, this is a black pen, which everyone will accept, so it's an assertion. It becomes part of common ground. Now this, remember, is an indexical, but we assume it's about this. This is a black pen. So before this, you didn't, it was sitting here, we didn't, or behind that, we didn't know it. So in some of these worlds, it was a black pen. In some of these, it was a red pen. Now I say this is a black pen. So now that set of worlds is gone, right? Now if I say, and this is black, will this shrink at all? No, because it was already contained in it. So that's the defective part. It's not quite, there's nothing wrong, but it doesn't move the discourse forward. It doesn't add to the common ground because it's entailed. The information was already there. And, again, there can be contexts where you want to remind someone. Not everything in the common ground is always in everyone's memory. So there are issues here, but in a basic case, you can't repeat what is already entailed because it just gives the sense of redundancy, basically. Okay. But if you have an implicator, that's not a problem, right? So if I say Vinita has a child, one becomes a little, or then in some of these worlds, maybe I had no children, you'll throw out those worlds. But if I say I have a child, I can follow some of them. Maybe you may think only one, but it's not entailed. I think all of you are right. It's an implicature, but so I can enforce it. So it's not like entailment, right? So even though, yeah, I've thrown out all the worlds in which I don't have children, some of them may have one, may have two, and I can reinforce that and say only one, in fact only one, or in fact three. It doesn't, I can add to that information. So all that is good. And then information builds up incrementally. So if you look at the third thing there, you can say Sue lives in New York City. So now you've added that information. Bill lives with Sue. And now if you say Bill lives in New Jersey, this is a problem, right? Because it's going to be inconsistent. Inconsistent because even though Bill lives in New Jersey is not the problem, there's nothing that says he lives in New York, but you're building it up incrementally, so the minute you say he lives with Sue and Sue lives in New York, then you've entailed that Bill lives in New York. And now what happens? In all these worlds, he's living in New York, and now you want to add he lives in New Jersey, and when you intersect the two, what will happen? There'll be nothing in common, right? So you'll get the empty set. So that's the idea, that discourse has to be consistent. Consistent means there should be words that can make all of the propositions true. So I'm going to introduce that in a minute. So these are all basic. So this is different from the earlier problem, right? That was redundancy. It didn't really create a problem. It just felt extra, unnecessary when we said this is a black pen and this is black. In this case, it feels something more seriously wrong. You can't make make it true because it's inconsistent. Okay, so what's the structure of this course that we take as a starting point? A common ground is a set of propositions such that for any context C, so this was a context, yesterday was maybe the more or less the same players, but a different context, right? We had a different set of propositions, it's grown since yesterday, but basically it's, you get a context C, and the common ground C will designate the common ground at C such that any proposition P in the common ground, the speaker believes P is in the common ground. So you and I know that we all know, and you know that we all know. So it's commonly shared. We don't have any, you know, there may be some misunderstanding. But the fundamental idea is we'll use language. I can say I also want tea because I assume that someone else has said I want tea, right? So I won't use the word also if everything is proceeding smoothly, unless it's whatever is its function is met by the common ground. Okay, and what is the context set? The context set is simply the intersection of these worlds. So the way in which we were eliminating all these worlds was by saying, what are the worlds in which the earth is flat? Take the full set of worlds, intersect the earth is not flat throughout the worlds in which the earth is. So it just proceeds by intersection, right? You take the set that makes all this true, then you add new information, use the set of worlds, and there should be something in the intersection. If it is like Bill lives with Sue and lives in New Jersey, then the intersection will be empty. So that's the constraint. A context set C star is the intersection of the propositions in the common ground, and it should be consistent, i.e. there should be some words. It should be a non-empty set of words. Good? Okay. Sentences are associated with functions from context to context. That's the incremental buildup of information. This is called the context change potential. And let P be the static semantic value of a sentence. The proposition it expresses in the ordinary intentional logic. Its dynamic value is a function mapping a context set C star, so the words in which this is true, to C star intersected with P. This is what we've been talking. Excluding from the original C star all situations in which P is false. Yes, right? Good so far? An assertion of S. So this is all about assertion, not questions, but we can extrapolate from there. At context C has the following effect. Common ground C becomes common ground C prime, where common ground C prime is the union of the old common ground plus whatever is the new proposition. And C star becomes C star intersected with P, so smaller. This is the new part that I would like to pay attention to. A sentence S presupposes a proposition P. So I also want T. The word also presupposes that there is some X other than Vinita who wants T. What is a presupposition? In any context C where S has a semantic value relative to C, so either it's, before you can say whether it's true or false, what do you want? You want the presupposition to be satisfied, right? And what does it mean for the presupposition to be satisfied? P follows from the common ground of C. So P should be here, or it should entail it. It doesn't have to be actually stated, but it should entail it in some way. I.e., any world C star is a P world, a world in which P is true. So basically, the common ground should entail someone other than Vinita wants T. In order for me to make the statement, I also want T. Make sense? So a presupposition in this way, it's actually a really beautiful theory, is simply an entailment, but it's exactly what the word says, right? Presupposition means before the sentence can be evaluated, the context before the new sentence is integrated should entail the presupposition. That's it. That's what we want it to be. That's what intuitively we suggested. One other thing, if we look at the next page, wait 1 second. Is everyone familiar with presupposition, entailment, the distinction between the two? Okay. So we don't need to worry about that. What about, okay, what about if I was to say, I have to leave class because I need to talk to my brother. Does my brother has a presupposition, right? That I have a brother. Does this, nobody stopped me from saying this sentence. Or is there a problem here? That I didn't say I have a brother, I want to talk to my brother? Why? The presupposition? You accommodated it, right? It's not so hard for you to think, yeah, people have siblings. So even if I did not explicitly say I have a brother, nothing here rules out that possibility, right? If I had been talking, let's say, at lunch yesterday, I said, I grew up as an only child and I always wanted to have siblings. Suppose I said that would be part of this, right? Vinita grew up an only child. And then today I said, I have to go talk to my brother. What would you say? The presupposition, unless of course in India we extend our notion of brother and sister very wide. So that's one of, you might think, okay, brother as in maybe cousin brother or something. But let's be, kind of literal about it. That would be a problem because something here would have already ruled out all the world, so there's no way so that presupposition could not be accommodated. There are other presuppositions that can't be accommodated. If I was to say, oh, I have to go to the hospital, my brother gave birth this morning. This is not possible because it's sort of like world knowledge, right? Brother has to be male, men don't give birth, etc., etc. So there's some things, not everything can be accommodated, and that's important because otherwise the theory of presupposition will, whenever you can't make it work, is accommodation. But there are limits on accommodation. So this idea that the common ground should be a set of propositions that are not at odds with each other, that they should be consistent, is a constraint on accommodation. Okay, some things are more easily accommodated than others. It's not about, if I say my daughter is, is doing such and such, it's not so hard to think that someone of my age would have a daughter, right? It's okay, you can accommodate. But if some little kid was to say that, you would think this is bizarre unless, they play acting, or you would have to find some way to make, it couldn't be taken as a literal fact, right? So accommodation has its limits, which is just as well as it should. Okay, so here on page 4, I've simply kind of spelled out that common ground really has to have propositions that are mutually known. In the simple case, in the best case scenario, both the speaker and the addressee, and usually we just, for simplicity, we assume there's one speaker, one addressee, but clearly here we have, multiple addressees, multiple potential speakers. But the idea is that it's not just good enough that I know that you know that something or the other, that maybe tea will be served at 11. We can only use that, language would be sensitive to that fact if not only I knew that and you knew that, but we both knew that we both know it, right? So that's the common ground is really something that's uncontroversial and understood, okay? So, sort of leading up to this talk that this case study that I want to present, what about questions? So this is Stolnika's, basically going back to Stolnika's idea of what is assertion. Assertion is a statement that adds to the common ground and narrows the space of live options. What now at the beginning of this class you said there are 3 things about felicity conditions to questions, right? So now we're looking at the speech act of questioning, and the first one was that the speaker should not know the answer and want to know the answer. desire to know, and the belief that the addressee knows it. So suppose I'm asking the question, is it raining? What should be or not be in this? This is my common ground, let's say. What proposition should not be there, or how do you want to capture the first part? Speaker does not know something. So let me make it precise. Sometimes I ask questions and, okay, okay. So the proposition, what should not be here? Both of them should be missing, right? Another way to say this should include worlds in which it's raining and worlds in which it is not raining. So if it has anything, this is the sentence it should have, or the proposition, or it is not raining, right? So, sorry. So this, I'm making it explicit, but it's the same idea that it should include both worlds. But we expect the addressee to know. Therefore, this is important to think of common ground as what is mutually known. So, of course, the only reason I would ask you the question is because I know that you may know. I want you to make an assertion with regard to these two possibilities so that I can move from a disjunction to either this or this, right? So in a way, a question is a request to the addressee to make an assertion with regard to a specified set of propositions. Does that make sense? Okay. One other point that's relevant here, which is that, which we've kind of hinted at before, I am going to make an assertion. I am blonde. Is it part of the common ground? I see there's some resistance I feel in this room to my assertion. I am blonde. What? What's your? Ooh, we know. So you can challenge me, right? So just because someone asserts something, it doesn't enter the common ground. So far we've been kind of idealizing. This is the piece that I think is there in Stolniker's work, and it's certainly understood. A lot is made out of this now in the current literature, and we will look at two papers tomorrow. By is it possible to everyone should have access to this, so I'll just give you the reference.
I've mailed it.
Oh, you mailed it to them. The Krivka paper also, or the Gunlokson? Okay. So what those papers, especially Gunlokson's paper, maybe both of them, really kind of go to that point where someone makes an assertion, and what happens before it enters the common ground. That's what's known as at issue. I'm making an assertion, I am blonde. But it doesn't mean that it will enter the common ground. It depends on whether you'll accept it. Now, this is simple case to settle, but we can argue about, I don't know, any number of things that we may have a difference of opinion, right? Tea is good for you. Maybe it isn't. I think so, you say no. So there can be disagreement, and they kind of capitalize on that. Again, these are not controversial things. What we need to evaluate is whether it plays a role in how we use language. Okay? But in terms of question semantics, I think everybody is on board with this idea that a question can only be asked felicitously if the alternatives are still open, right? Okay. So what I'm going to do next, I think if I just tap on this, it'll come up, right? No?
You want to use that?
After the thing. Yeah. So after the break, I'll use it. So what I'm going to look at now is why I call it a case study. This is the handout that says a case study scope marking. I'm going to look at two ways of asking a question, at least two ways, in some languages three, in English. And that's on 1A and 1B, okay? And one can ask a number of questions about them. So so far we've been looking at direct questions. These are kind of embedded questions, okay, with extraction. So where do you think we should go? This is a question often comes up, right, when you're making plans just before, at the end of class, you're going to dinner. So where do you think we should go? And the answer could be, let us go to the cafeteria, or let us go home and study, or whatever, right? You can not, let me say it in the right intonation. What do you think? Where should we go? Right? We use this type of question. I call it sequential scope marking. How many of you have heard of scope marking before? It's been in the literature for some time, but enough people, I will start from scratch anyway. But in English, for a long time, people did not actually recognize that it had scope marking, because scope marking was first discovered in German. And the form of that was something like C, which is ungrammatical in English. It was, what do you think where we should go? But what do you think where we should go? Which is hard even to get off your, So it should be read like one sentence. Where do you think where we should go? Which is ungrammatical in English. But if you say, what do you think? Where should we go? Then it becomes okay. All right? So this is called subordinated scope marking. Some languages have all three. Some languages have just one. Some languages have two. So there's variation there. The questions that we want to ask, and I think given how much we've covered between yesterday and today, I think we should be able to do that. Is the variation only in the syntax? Or is the variation also in the semantics? Because we've been talking about questions as the set of possible answers, right? They both seem to have the same set of possible answers. We should go home, we should go to the cafeteria, we should go to the library, whatever, right? So if a question denotes the set of possible answers and two questions have the same set of possible answers, are we justified in thinking that they are really the same question at some level of syntax? The other option is that no, in fact, whether they are the same or not, why should there be two alternative strategies, and do they emerge in language acquisition at the same time? And the third question is, can you really have semantic and pragmatic equivalence? Like, is there such a thing as synonymy? If you really want to think broadly, why have two ways of doing the same thing? Is that part of natural language? So these are the three questions I'm interested in, and I'll use scope marking as a way of looking at them. So let's come back to this after the break. Okay? Questions before? Yes?
When you talked about exhaustivity,
Mm-hmm.
you said the sentence,
Mm-hmm.
when Mary talked to John, it actually excludes all other alternate possibility for John.
Yeah.
But I can always follow that sentence with Mary talked to John. He also talked to someone else. He also talked to Bill.
So this was an answer to the question, or just by itself?
It was answer to the question, who did Mary talk to yesterday? Yeah.
Okay. So, and your name, Rinku says, so if I just come in and say Mary talked to John, she also talked to Bill. That's not a problem, right?
But if I'm using in class, I cannot follow it with the also thing.
Okay, yes, okay. So there are two things which I'll just throw at you, and then you can think about. Even in that, so the first one was as an answer. I said, normally if I ask you, who did she talk to, and you said she talked to John, then I'm assuming that she didn't talk to Bill either. But what Rinku is saying is that you can say, who did she talk to, and now you answer me and you say, she talked to John, she also talked to Bill. Sounds okay? If you say it one after the other, probably so there's if you didn't follow it up right away, then I think you would have to do a backtracking, right? So if you said she talked to John and you stopped, I think I would be licensed to infer that that was it. But I think what your full answer is, it almost sounds like you added that you were aware of the implication and you added it's yeah. So that's something that yes. So that's what it sounds like. Now, of course, people who will put in the exhaustivity operator don't allow for implicature. So I would say they would say that you said, okay, so let me ask you, is there a choice to be made between she talked to John and Bill versus she talked to John, she also talked to Bill? Is there a difference in your mind? It's sort of like what I'm doing now. Yeah, you. Mm-hmm.
Maybe when we say she talked to John and Bill, maybe she could have talked to them together. But when we say she talked to John and she also talked to Bill, she talked to them separately.
Plus, the conversation was more salient when she talked to the first person, and that was a peripheral or.
It's possible. So it's not, I'm not ruling it out at all. What I'm saying is maybe you might think a little bit about why you had a choice. So let's say she talked separately. I don't know if that's a way of just salience or whatever. Why would you choose to say she talked to John, she also talked to Bill, as opposed to she talked to John and Bill? Again, I'm not determining what the answer should be, but it's something. One thing is for sure, that if you didn't say she also talked to Bill, then you would be implying most, you would allow that implicature to stay, that it was only John, right? You would not have defeated that implicature. So yeah, I'm not ruling that out by any means. But I'd be curious to hear if you feel there is a difference between the two.
The second one can be the addressee didn't expect that she would have talked to Bill. The also can be that.
Yeah, that's one thing.
Not a separate thing, but
She may, yeah, it may be that.
Issue and
context.
All because of its the implicature itself. As soon as you have said John,
Mhm.
you have sort of not expecting anyone else.
And therefore you are quickly adding. Yeah. So there's something there that yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. Let's get tea. We can think about it more.
And how do you differentiate the exhaustivity in a club sentence and sentence like this?
Yeah. So yeah, that was your other. So you couldn't say it was John she talked to. She also talked to Bill. That was, and you probably can't do it even. I don't know about only, but the idea is the cleft has a presupposition, right? So the cleft is only good in so there are two parts to it. One, she talked to someone, and then the cleft actually specifies, and that someone is X, right? That's the meaning. So once you say she talked to someone, and that someone is John, by using the cleft, then to say she also talked to Bill seems to be, I mean,
But it's not an entailment, right?
what?
If I say she only spoke to John,
Mm-hmm.
then there's an entailment that she spoke to no one else. But
Mm-hmm.
it was John she spoke to. It's a presupposition, but not an entail.
But in this way of looking at it, presupposition is really, so the presupposition simply is that she talked to someone. Doesn't stop her from talking to more than one person. But the choice of the cleft, it was Bill she talked to, is an identificational thing, right? She talked to someone, and that someone is John, which makes it, again, if you look at the literature on cleft, probably you'll see some discussion of it, whether the exhaustivity is something that can be cancelled or not. I feel like you can't cancel it, but I hesitate to say that because people, when they study things, they find things that we don't immediately expect, but this is the kind of question you want to look at. To what extent is that exhaustivity, is it at all cancelable, right? Because the exhaustivity is coming not from the presupposition per se, but from identifying she talked to someone, that someone was John, then maybe it's not particularly, maybe other people she talked to is not what's highlighted by this discourse. But yeah, take a look. Let's go have tea, then we'll come back and do this.